Assalamu alaikum. You're watching Views and News and I'm Faisal Rahman live from our Islamabad studios. Today's top story, actually we'll be covering just one story today but in detail, and that is about the withdrawal of the Russian troops from Syria. This was stated by the Russian President Vladimir Putin yesterday, and he said the Russian troops will start going back to Russia. But there are three major questions which we'll be asking our panelists today. The first one is, what about the aerial strikes? So far, according to sources, there have been over 9,000 strikes post 30th September last year. So 9,000 strikes means almost about 1,000 strikes or maybe more than that every month. And then you talk about what is going to be the time period of withdrawal. Now that is a big question as well. How long will they take and what will be the procedure? And that what kind of a presence would the Russians maintain in the region as far as the naval base is concerned or the air base is concerned. And the third important question is about the trust deficit between Russia and versus the entire Western world. So we'll be talking about that also in our segment. We'll be also talking about the World Cup T20 2016 because today India is going to play against New Zealand. That is going to be the first match, the opening match. And interestingly, they've played 4 matches in T20 World Cups, and interestingly, India has lost all those 4. So let's see what happens today, as Indians are considered to be one of the best teams and favorite to pick up the World Cup. But to talk about the first story, before I introduce the panel, let's watch this report which we have prepared for you.
After the surprise withdrawal announcement by President Vladimir Putin, Russian forces are preparing to start leaving Syria. Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu gave the order to withdraw, and aircraft are being loaded up for long-range flights back to Russia. Russia is a key ally of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, and his office sought to reject speculation that there was a rift between the two countries, saying the move was mutually agreed. Western officials cautiously welcomed the move, saying it could pressure Syria's government to engage in talks. Peace talks aimed at resolving the conflict are entering a second day. The Russian air campaign started last September, tipping the balance in favor of the Syrian government and allowing it to recapture territory from the rebels. No details have been given on how many planes and troops would be withdrawn from the Hmeimim base in Latakia province or a deadline for completing the pullout. But the Defense Ministry said in a statement on its website that the main part of the Russian armed forces group in Syria was being relocated to the Russian Federation. Russia's military intervention bolstered President Assad's forces on key front lines where they were close to collapse. It is not clear how many military personnel Russia has deployed, but U.S. estimates suggest the number ranges from 3,000 to 6,000. Mr. Putin, however, said that Russia's Mediterranean naval base at Tartus would continue to operate as normal. Russia had long insisted its bombing campaign only targeted terrorist groups, but Western powers had complained the raids hit political opponents of President Assad. In Geneva, talks aimed at ending the conflict continue, with the UN envoy for Syria, Staffan de Mistura, expected to meet the opposition umbrella group, the High Negotiations Committee. Mr. de Mistura had earlier described the efforts as a moment of truth and warned there was no plan B should the talks fail, with the only alternative a return to war. Most participants in the conflict agreed to a cessation of hostilities, which has been largely holding, despite reports of some violations on all sides. Meanwhile, the UN Commission of Inquiry on Syria will present its report on war crimes committed by all sides in Syria's war to the UN Human Rights Council. In a phone call, Mr. Putin and US President Barack Obama discussed the situation in Syria and the next steps required to fully implement the cessation of hostilities. The Russian move has received a guarded welcome from Western diplomats and the Syrian opposition, but it is too early to say what it means or what was behind it.
That was a report prepared by our production team. Now I'll introduce you to our guests. We have with us in our studio on my right is Bakr Yunus, a known Arab journalist. So thank you very much for taking out the time. And we have with us Dr. Yamin Saab, known defense analyst. So thank you.
Thank you.
And we have with us Dr. Okab Malik, a strategic analyst. So thank you very much. Bakr, we've been doing a lot of shows on this particular subject and in particular about the Syrian crisis and all. And suddenly, I mean, out of nowhere the statement comes from the Russian president that he is going to withdraw his troops from Syria. Do you think they have achieved their objective there?
Actually, they have achieved many objectives. Number one, they have pushed the opposition to come to negotiation table. And that, by accepting what the Demonstrator said, that Syria have to become a kind of federation. in which Bashar Assad will, of course, be controlling, because he is part of the solution now. They are considering him as part of the solution, and they have pushed the opposition to accept this. At the same time, Syria, this kind of federation, will be actually the beginning of, division of Syria. They want to have a Kurdish state, they want to have an Arab state, and they want to have an Alawi state inside Syria. So, of course, Russians have accomplished their target.
That means that can also lead to the division of Iraq, if Kurdistan is being formed, and even in the case of Turkey.
It is happening in Iraq, actually. It is happening in Iraq. And the thing is, they have not actually, pulled, they have not withdrawn fully. They have actually relocated their forces somehow, and they have partially, withdrawn, which means they are actually waiting what will be the opposition's reaction. If they accept what the Bashar Assad and their government will say to them, then it's fine, otherwise they are coming back. So at the end, we are not seeing kind of victory for the opposition. We are not seeing kind of a real withdrawal from the Russian accepting what they have done, which is actually really a crime kind of war in Syria. We are seeing a kind of political solution movement by the Russians in order to pressurize more the opposition to accept what Bashar Assad wants and what Russians want by the opposition, to stop their action against Bashar Assad and to accept Bashar Assad as a solution and to start division of Syria.
All right. Now, Turul Sahab, first of all, the same question to you, your take on that point. Plus also, do you think, sir, now Bashar al-Assad has a major role, has a bigger role to play? Because since he's been accepted to some extent by the Western world, especially by the Americans, and let's see what happens now.
No, Bashar al-Assad has proven to be a great survivor. From the beginning, the US and the Saudis were saying that they would not talk to him at all, and their first condition was removal of Assad from the scene.
Yes.
But he has survived. And what the Russians have done is they've given him a huge respite. They've been able to bomb places and get almost 400 locations free from forces opposed to Assad. So they have given Assad a huge respite. They have allowed them, they've reeled back the troops loyal to Assad, and that is also a main point from this conundrum. The forces who have been loyal to Assad have remained loyal. They have not rebelled. So that goes to show that Assad has a popular base. The army is with him, and to a large extent he's secure in his place. So what is going to happen now? The talks are going to resume in Geneva, and the Mistura is there, and the negotiation high committee, the main opposition committee of the Syrians are there. So we'll see how the progress is made there. But Russians have given...
Are you optimistic?
I am optimistic because after all there should be some solution to Syria, whether it's fragmented, whether it's partitioned, the amount of people who have been killed, the amount of people who have starved, the amount of people who have fled, the amount of people who have drowned in the sea. So this is a tragedy of huge proportions in modern times, and this got to end. So I think now that the Russians and the arrival of Russians on the scene had sent mixed signals, because the Turks weren't happy. They shot down one of their aircraft, the Su-25, which crossed their border, their airspace. The Turks are also facing a lot of difficulties because Ankara has been targeted again. 34 people have been killed. So the Kurdish problem remains there. The Turks are annoyed. The US is not happy. The Brits are not happy. The French are not happy. But with the departure of the Russians and with their limited military aims achieved, I think something would happen on the negotiating table, and they'll be able to do something.
Your take.
Well, I think Putin's achieved a lot of his goals. I think come from nowhere, entered a very divisive and terrible civil war and changed it around and made Russia come to the forefront and the negotiating table itself, and to become one of the main negotiators for the current regime in Syria. That turns the tables around completely from what all the other parties were doing. A lot of the Arab states were against Bashar al-Assad. There was him who was being overwhelmed to an extent. He was losing large parts of the country and had done. I'm not saying that all the countries come back to him. It's not. And as Dr. has said, many different settlements, up to 400, have been taken back, and large parts of Aleppo, which is the largest city in Syria, has been taken back. On top of that, the Russians have secured their airbase and Tartus naval base for continued use to ensure that their strategic placement in the Mediterranean continues to exist, which is the foremost objective that they had.
This is what
it's
it's
not going to be touched.
Exactly.
And let's hold on a second. They're going to withdraw, they say. We'll see what happens. Personally, I think it's important to look at all sides. I think the Brits, the Americans especially, have become more pragmatic, and that's the word we need to use, as far as Bashar al-Assad is concerned. However, there are large elements within the resistance, or the rebels, who do not want him there. As far as they see he's a butcher, and they're going to negotiate that out of it. But when we look at the dire realities on the ground, where the large powers are agreeing upon themselves, as they had done many times before, after the Second World War and what happened with Syria, and that's how it came about anyway, between the colonial powers and negotiating and how that came about. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, I find that maybe this is going to occur again, to the detriment of what may happen in the future. Mm-hmm. But what do? Do we continue the war and see what happens, and then thousands more die? Or we try to find a solution? And
the wise approach is to try to find the solution.
And at the end of the day, we don't want more people to die. I mean, we've seen all these images anyway, and 250,000 plus.
Dr. Kaab, do you think the Europeans were under a lot of pressure because of the refugees?
They are, obviously.
And that is one of the reasons, I mean, they actually negotiated with the Russians.
But this is what NATO chief said, that they sabotaged with this, the refugee thing to overwhelm Europe, so they could use it as a bargaining chip.
And they've done it.
But whether that was the case or not, because it was occurring before
it wasn't
Russians
because of Russia, it was
it wasn't, but it was occurring anyway. There is a large element of that. And there's a lot of discord in Europe because of the migrant crisis. And they want to resolve it. They want to turn back that tide of issues where a lot of the Syrians don't really want to go. They want to stay at home, but they can't. Now you have to recognize that. And it's in shambles, Syria is, large parts of it. So a lot of this needs to come in. And when they negotiate a final, everybody's forgotten one thing. ISIS is still there. What are they going to do about that?
That's $1 million question. There you go, sir. ISIS, Daesh, or all these extremist elements, they were there, they are still there. Though a lot of damage has been done, but you can't deny that they do not exist anymore. They're there.
Actually, this means that the Russian attack was not against ISIS. It was against the civilians.
I mean, by the aerial strikes, you can't eliminate them 100%.
Yeah.
But you have done the
most
damage.
Most of what's happening is not happening to the same target everybody's claiming. See, Russians said we are coming for ISIS. Bashar al-Assad said I will not accept what the rebels say because they are ISIS. What we have seen, the ISIS is still there. Nobody have attacking them. They are still strong in Iraq, in Syria. They have been very much supportive from who knows from where. Last time
every single country is fighting a proxy war, whether it's Russia or whether it's Turkey or whether it's Saudi Arabia or Jordan or Egypt, you name it.
And between ISIS and between Russia. It's actually between Russia and with the people. It's between Bashar and his own people. The main problem was how did Bashar Assad, and why do Bashar Assad treat his people in this way? What they wanted, they asked for simple democracy. We want to change. Everybody have asked for a change. And his reply was, okay, fine, you want to change, you have to die. Okay, this is what.
But if he remains in power, where it seems that he's going to be the man running the show now again.
No, actually,
but then what difference has it made? I mean, during the last 4 years or so, according to certain official sources, 300,000. According to non-official sources, it's about 800,000 people who have died.
Because of?
I mean, this is what I heard in a couple of television channels. I mean obviously that is a propaganda campaign, but let's suppose 300,000 people. That's not a joke. 300,000 is a huge number.
Even a single person died, it's not a joke.
But let's not be simplistic here. The rationale behind the uprising at the beginning wasn't just that. There was a lot of issues involved and a lot of interference from other countries. And the Saudi was always against Bashar al-Assad because it was seen as the closest Arab ally of Iran, and there was that proxy going on. So there's a lot of other issues involved. It's not just simply the people wanted something more. That may well have been a foremost, but there are other issues involved as well. We can't negate those. And these all must be discussed. And that's where the problem lies. A couple of weeks ago when, just before the peace talks and the ceasefire, I projected, I think I was here, maybe I was in another program in PTV, but I projected that if we're allowed to have a certain amount of non-violence, although there has been some bombings, but the reduction has been quite great, then it could lead to a potential opportunity for people to get together because you've cooled the heads down from different parties and they've learned to understand the pragmatism of it. And this is all going to come down to pragmatism. Nobody is going to get everything they want. There's going to have to be a lot of compromise on all sides.
All the sides.
And this is where it's going to go. But that is a step forward more than any other step that's been made in the last 5 years. And that's what we've got to look forward to. Who's going to compromise more than any other? This may well have been pre-coordinated by the Russians, and it's a very well-played move, I think, to put them on the
Well played and well negotiated also.
and well negotiated, putting pressure on the right place, bringing Bashar al-Assad back to the table with a certain amount of strength. But he does represent a certain amount of community. And he does represent a large, maybe if not all the army, you know, at least the army that's present at the moment, which is a strong force.
Now, sir, look, I'll just give you another example. The ousted president of Yemen was present when our Prime Minister went to attend the final session of this Northern Thunder exercise. So he was there as well, along with Jabir al-Sabah, the Emir of Kuwait, and the General of, and rather the Supreme Commander, let's call him the Supreme Commander of Egypt, General Sisi was there as well. Now my point is that if the ousted one is considered as legitimate, then Bashar al-Assad should be considered legitimate because he still holds power.
Though, is he?
That's what my point is. Now moving on to you, Turul Sahab, now 2 points. About the airstrikes, they will definitely continue that because they have their bases there, they have their presence there, and you know, whenever they'll think that the Air Force is needed to destroy a certain target, whether it's Daesh or ISIS or whatever it is, they'll use that. Second point is about the time period. How long will the Russians take to withdraw? Because the Americans have been making so many claims in Afghanistan and in Iraq, but you know, years and years have passed and their presence is still there. But the most important point, which I want you to throw light on, is about the trust deficit between the Russians and the Western world, in particular the Americans. This is what I was watching on almost all the television channels. Well, they say, well, that's a wise move, we really appreciate that, but they would, you know, just go after the Russians. You know, they claim that they haven't killed even a single civilian, then they would show reports. Now, that trust deficit point, sir, holds the key. Whatever is happening, I mean, a couple of states involved in another country, their people are fleeing, their people are dying, they've got no interest as such other than the strategic interest, but still making comments. Will that make any difference?
Also, you have put forward 2 questions. First is how long would it take them to withdraw? I think it would not take them a very long time to withdraw. In fact, the news reports coming 3 hours ago said that they have already reached Voronezh in Russia, and they have been received there. Actually, the people who were there at the air base, the Hamaimam air base and Latakia, were not ground troops. They were either aircraft or the people supporting them. So they had
the support staff and
so they had the Su-25s. They had those were the fighter aircraft, and they had the Su-34s, which were the multi-role bombers, and then they had a certain kind of cargo planes. Either they were Tupolovs or Antonovs. They've all flown back. So I don't, and the only thing that they've left behind is advanced air defense systems. And as far as the base in Tartus is concerned, it's only
so they can strike any point from there. They have that kind of a technology.
Right. They have they have the strategic mobility. You see, they have the air-to-air, the tankers which can refuel you in mid-air. So they have those strategic tankers. Pakistan also purchased a few of them, a couple of them from the Russians. So the Tartus base is not a base where they have deployed their warships. It's called a material technical support base. It was always a base which was meant to provide them support. It is a logistic base.
Okay.
So they can only deploy 100 feet long size ships there, and that too with floating piers outside the northern breakwaters. Okay. So, and the typical Russian warships cannot even dock over there. So it's not meant for, it's just meant to provide them some kind of midway point so they don't have to go back to their home base in Black Sea to cross the Turkish Strait. So they go there only for maintenance and supplies and support. So They don't have boots on ground. They've taken their air assets, they've left their air defense elements there. So I don't think they will be taking part in air raids anymore. The purpose, what Putin has said, that we have largely achieved our military objectives. So they've gone back, lock, stock and barrel. So redeploying air forces is simple. It doesn't take long. The support staff can come later, but the aircraft have gone. As far as the trust deficit is concerned, Faisal Saab, the point is the Americans and the Russians are already in a new kind of a war. They have fought in Ukraine. The Russians have been able to wrench back Crimea from them. They have come to Syria and they've shown flexed their muscles and shown that we can make an effect. And the Americans have not taken very lightly of that. Many also opine that the reason that Russians have been there only for such a short period was that this was having an economic effect on them. There were many salaries which had not been paid. The effect was showing on them. And also the Saudis had talked to them and said, look buddies, you are supporting the Shiite, you are part of us in OPEC, the oil cartel.
Yes.
So better listen to us than to your proxies in Syria. So there are multiple issues. So the trust deficit is there. There is this international game going on, Russians versus the Americans. So they will, because Russia is the new major power in the bloc, so they will continue to show their muscles, but they have their problems. They have their economy is in doldrums.
Oh yes, and
so
plus there are a lot of sanctions still imposed on Russia.
Right.
By the Western world, so that is another problem. I think that he has negotiated, and we'll get to know as the time will pass. But now a couple of points before I move on to Bakr Sahab. Kap, tell me about two issues. For example, now we believe that the Russians will withdraw, and it is going to be a win-win situation for all. Maybe Turkish, as you earlier mentioned, that everybody has to compromise. You won't get the complete pie. You have to divide it, and then you have to distribute it. Now, who is going to get the maximum share of that pie in this particular situation?
I think let's look at what parties are present right now. On the ground in Syria, you have Bashar al-Assad, his party, and holds large parts in the more developed part of Syria. You have Daesh, you have the Aslan al-Nusra Front, and you have the other rebel groups that are combining together in one form or another under a coalition, who are disjointed, by the way, as well.
Kurd, you have got Turkmen.
And these and the Kurds in the north, and etc. The point is, you've got multiple parties with multiple interests and multiple contention with each other different party. So it's not going to be easy. And the one with the most control or the most governance control is Bashar al-Assad still. He still holds the cards in that respect, but not all of them anymore. And since we're not going to even or the peace talks are not going to even consider al-Nusra Front and Daesh. So that's a large segment of that part of the country that's not going to come into consideration. Who's left? And who's backing who's left? And this is what matters, and how far they're willing to go to push whatever they want to push. Threats of invasion, threats of troops on the ground, etc., etc. And what is it going to come to? I think it's come to a good conclusion so far, but we have to wait and see. The Americans are hesitant, because they said that last year when Russia was talking about peace talks, it was still firing and engaged in a large offensive by the Russian so-called backed rebels in eastern Ukraine. So you're right, trust deficit, but has there ever been any trust?
Never.
Never. So, we're in a realist world. There is no trust. So we can't rely on the idea of trust.
It's not trust, it's interest.
It's interest, and how far you're willing to go to succeed in those interests, and how far you're willing to negotiate those interests. And this is what Putin did. He enabled the negotiation for Bashar al-Assad to be much greater and to help him.
So Bashar is going to negotiate from a position of strength. Is that what you mean?
I would say more strength. I wouldn't say complete strength or anything. They're all relative, aren't they, compared to what they're going to negotiate and how much. And that's what everybody needs to get on the ground and see and figure out exactly where they stand. And we're going to see how it plays out. Nobody knows what's going to happen.
Only time will tell. I mean, the next couple of months are really important. Because they're going to set the tone, basically.
But isn't this positive?
to tell you
So-
the
so
truth,
if we see
at
this
least
functioning-
something is happening. At least
And
there is
it's positive.
something positive. Yeah, there you go.
And I see it hopeful and positive, and I think we need to take that edge onto it. However, we need to be pragmatic, we need to be realists and say things can break down very easily, and they have done many times in different wars around the world. They come to a stumbling block, a loggerheads where they're irreconcilable wills on each side, and they can't agree. And that can happen very easily depending on the circumstance and how far each side, and there's multiple sides now, multiple negotiations, and how they come together, and who puts what pressure on who.
All right. Now, Mr. Bakar, the Russians' withdrawal obviously is the top story of today. But when we talk about the solution, obviously this war started way back in 2011, almost like 5 years now. Bashar, we would think that he's going to either get killed by some airstrike or something of that sort, or he's going to, you know, be like either Muammar Gaddafi, or if not Muammar Gaddafi,
Hosni
like
Mubarak.
Hosni Mubarak or something.
Yeah.
Now his father was there for almost over 3 decades, and now he's in power, and now, but he's got a lot of support. I mean, the Russian support meant a lot to him. You know, only Iranians could not have managed. But that support resulted in something very positive for him. So that means that he's stable, he's going to stay. So then what was the problem if he was in power before? And that means that the Western world, whatever they wanted, they wanted a regime change. They haven't been able to do that.
Who wanted?
The Western world,
you-
the Turkish, the Saudi
you
Arabians,
can't,
the
like,
Egyptians.
you are just like, in this just sentence, you have accused all the Syrians who fought for their demands in Syria.
Technically speaking,
you can't say this.
all those who have
this-
sacrificed,
No, they
who
have
have laid down their
sacrificed. They will
lives.
have, no.
I mean, if
it was
this
not
man
to
stays
serve-
there again, then what was the point?
No. This is what they want, to keep him. Okay, but people still they don't want, and we have to understand that the Russians have actually pulled now.
The same countries which will support him in the future were also holding him responsible
You have to know
for
that-
certain war crimes.
No, this is a kind of assumptions. We are assuming that he is going to stay. We are assuming that he will have the support. Bashar Assad was going to fall. Iranian came to support him. Iranians couldn't support him. That's why Russian came.
Yes.
Which means actually he is standing on nowhere. If he had even 1% of what you call support from his own people, that he would have stayed. But he is actually not having any. That's why the Russians came. That's why the Iranians came. The withdrawal of Russia actually comes in a time they are very much insisting to put the rebels on negotiation table. Why? Because they know that the ongoing increasing this coalition, that 34 countries, the Islamic coalition, which actually will send their troops to Syria, according to what they said, will create a different kind of equation in the Middle East. So to avoid this kind of action from Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, Malaysia, Indonesia, and kind of collection of big collection of Islamic countries under one umbrella, they say, okay, fine, we will pull out, we will withdraw, let them go to the negotiation table. This is the main reason, actually. That's why they're using this time, especially. Everybody was speaking about Saudi Arabia.
So you think the Saudi diplomacy has played a major role?
Everybody was speaking about Saudi Arabia is going to take a nuclear weapon from Pakistan. Everybody was speaking about how Pakistan now is, participating with Saudi Arabia, this North Thunder exercises.
Northern Thunder, yeah.
Which means actually Saudi Arabia is really planning to send their troops somehow inside Syria to finish Bashar Assad here and there, or to support the rebels.
But the Saudis can't even manage to control their own border with Yemen, sir.
No, they can. No. Can't is something, and can. They have actually. They are actually controlling. Yemen is already all the Yemen.
They've asked
Saudi
Pakistan
Arabia.
for the ground troops, by
They
the
can
way.
ask for support. Doesn't mean that they can't. Asking for support because they want their movement to be supported internationally. They don't want to be. It's one-to-one kind of war. They want to show that what they are doing actually it's an international supported action. And the same thing the Americans do, the same thing Russians
This
do.
Northern Thunder exercise was one of the largest of its kind
See,
in that
so
region.
that's why Russian actually have Russian know they have learned from Afghanistan very well that they can't stand in front of anything called Islamic. We know that the Mujahideen in Afghanistan they were not that much strong, but they actually have forced Russia to withdraw.
But Syria is a different battleground, isn't it?
It's more complicated. It's more strength. It's more difficult for the
But there's
Russians
so
to stay
many
in.
factions fighting amongst themselves, That wasn't the case in
This is the
Afghanistan
news
because
coming
all
out.
these different groups were together fighting against the Red Army.
No, they are not that much fighting. Syrians are very united. Syrians are very strong people. Syrians have, nobody had occupied Syria before. You know, the history tells. Even the French, when they came to occupy Syria, they couldn't. Okay, we know this actually, the north of Middle East is a very difficult place to occupy. You know, the whole Middle East actually were always a very difficult place to occupy from the, foreign forces. So Syrian people, they're not that much easy, they're not that much stupid, they are very much educated, they are very much, enlightened, they know what they are doing very well. Of course, the situation is not in their favor now, but I am sure, 100%, it will be in their favor. Bashar Assad will be thrown out somehow. He will not stay anymore in Syria, because nobody is supporting him.
Sir, would you like to take the same point further?
Yes, I think Bashar's days have been numbered for a very long time now. His days have been numbered.
So we've been hearing that ever since that deal, when they had to surrender that huge arsenal of
I totally agree, but you
chemical
see,
weapons, 1,000 tons if I'm not wrong.
Dynasties cannot last. They have to, one day or the other, dynasties have got to come to an end. When will Bashar's long reign of terror end? I don't know.
Are you talking about a democratic process in Syria, sir? The one which we have witnessed in Egypt, for instance. I mean, just imagine General Sisi talking about democracy, sir.
What has happened in Egypt is a travesty of justice. That's another story. But I think Bashar has been in power for too long. He's not cut out to be a statesman. He was an ophthalmologist, if I'm not wrong, an eye specialist. Like Abdullah, he also wants to be a statesman. So he's not cut out to be a statesman. He's been there artificially. He has his army which supports him. But now we were talking about that video clip that you showed us, that they are preparing a war crimes report. Yes. And I'm sure they will indict Bashar al-Assad, because there are
there's enough proof.
There's enough proof, credible proof, that he conducted very savage atrocities against his own people. He used gas attacks. In fact, the reason that the Americans went after them in 2013 was because they said we have incontrovertible evidence that he used gas against his own people. So that is when they were about to strike him, and that's when the Russians came into their support, and they said, okay, if they sign the CWC Chemical Weapon Convention, and they've agreed to have all their chemical weapons stocks destroyed.
And all those stocks were seized, yes?
Yeah. So Bashar al-Assad will go one day or the other, today, tomorrow, 10 days, 15 days, 30. He has been artificial.
So the man who was always considered as a part of problem will be considered as a part of solution. Yes, sir, if you allow me, sir, we've been joined by Nasir Chaudhry sahab. Nasir Chaudhry is an international relations expert. Assalamu alaikum, Nasir sahab.
Ji, walaikum salam, Faisal sahab.
Sir, nice to have you in our show. We were talking about this very interesting move by the Russians to withdraw their troops from Syria. Now let's start off from there. So what is your take? How optimistic are you that this particular move is going to sort of, bring peace in the region?
Well, for a start, I don't think that the announcement by President Putin is surprising, because no country, and a country as major and as big a player as Russia, would go to a theater of conflict with so many, overlapping powers with their own agendas and interests without some objectives and goals. The Russians went there because Syria is a major Russian ally in the Middle East. It has always been an ally ever since the time of President Bashar's father. They have a naval base at Tartus, which has been one of the few selected bases that the Russians operate globally. So they've achieved their objectives. President Putin went here delivering a clear message to the US and the West that whatever you did in Libya, Iraq and other countries is not going to be taken hands down. This is our sphere of influence. It's our ally. And they went there with objectives. They've achieved those objectives. They're withdrawing because it is a vindication of President Putin and Russian stand of it being a major power and a major stakeholder. So President Bashar al-Assad does have relative strength with the ongoing talks now in Geneva, and of course a lot of backroom discussion on this has taken place.
Correct.
So, but if this relative strength, which includes about, the recapturing of 400 towns, 10,000 kilometers of territory, would translate into something tangible is, I think, a bit of a fancy for President Assad to live or believe in, because on the ground, people don't want him.
All right, thank you very much, Nasir Chaudhry, for your comments, sir. Now, sir, last quick comment from all of you, sir. Since we are talking about the current situation, sir, what would be the future of these refugees who are like, oh, sir, you have prepared a report, I remember, on that, sir.
Yes, we will.
Let me start from you then. I mean, there are millions in numbers, sir. I mean, for God's sake, I mean, when you look at those visuals or those pictures, I mean, you know, you being a father, I just can't stand it.
Aylan al-Kurdi.
Can you imagine, sir? Now, what would be the future and what should the Europeans do now, sir, in order to play a positive and effective role in order to make sure that Syria, whether good, bad or ugly, forget about Bashar al-Assad, whosoever comes in even after him, sir, at the end of the day, the region shouldn't sacrifice, sir. The people should be resettled in their homeland.
I don't think that the refugees who have already migrated to Europe are going to come back anytime soon, although it's quite another
Those
story.
who are still stuck.
Those who are still stuck, the Germans are trying to offer a lot of money to the Turks that they should be resettled. In fact, Turkey has agreed to a certain extent. They have offered them easy visas to the Turkish national. They're not including Turkey in the EU, but they said we are going to give you a visa on a fast track, so you don't have to wait for an entry into Europe and other things. They have also offered them a lot of money so that they stop sending the Syrians to Europe, because Turks are actually letting them go. The very, very bad image of Aylan al-Kurdi, that 4-year-old kid who was found floating on the seafront on the beach. So Turks are letting them go. Turks say that we are overwhelmed. They've got 2 million refugees of their own. They want some of them resettled in Syria. So this is a problem. The Europeans, some of the Europeans have been generous. The Germans have been very generous. The others have been very miser in their approach. Danes or Norwegians have even said that we are going to confiscate anything which is more than $1,000, which is found on the person of a refugee. So and the Schengen is about to break down. They are already placing barrier controls. The border controls are already there. So
look at Hungary, Austria, so many other countries.
So their response to refugees have not been up to the mark. It has not been humanitarian. If you look at Pakistan, the way Pakistan has accepted refugees, I think you just can't compare the way the Europeans have treated these people. But the fact is that they cannot return them. Many of these countries are aging populations. Germany is a case in point. So
most of them.
So in many cases, this young population will add to their economy. It will buttress their economy. It will help them out. And Germans know that. Although Ms. Merkel has suffered 2 defeats yesterday in the provincial elections, but she's still holding on. She said, I'm going to accept them. So when the Germans say that, it's not illogical. They have their things planned out.
She has lost that popularity also because of her decision.
But in the long run, she understands that the refugees are going to help her out, because there is a aging population. They don't have working hands in the factories and in their workplaces.
Even in certain European countries, the population has gone down. Actually.
Right. So
Bucket, your take.
I
the
think
future of the refugees.
It is a sad story, and it will continue to be a sad story. A person who have left his house for no reason, a person who lost his family and somehow.
And those houses doesn't even exist anymore.
Whatever, even if you give them a job, you give them whatever, you give them. The only solution for them, actually, the thing that if you want to consider them as a human being, is to return them back to their house, safe and sound, which is actually will never happen. In this
why won't
unfortunate
it happen? I mean, what's the hindrance? What's the problem?
We know war is happening there. This war is going on in their country. So how can they go back? Who will let them in? Bashar Assad will not let them in.
Do you think so you're not optimistic? Don't you think that there could be a settlement amongst various non-state actors and
Of course not. Of course not. If now we know that the weaker side is the rebels, is the people of Syria. They're the weaker side, and they've been pressurized by the Russian army, by Iranian army, by Syrian army, and they're only civilians. 3 armies are fighting civilians. So how can be optimistic?
One more point, sir, before I move to Dr. Hukab. Now, interestingly, when you look at the overall situation in the entire region, and you look at the current situation of Turkey, because Turkey has a very important role to play.
Exactly.
I think the most important, I would say, role is of Turkey at the moment. But looking at what happened 2 days ago in Ankara, I mean, and post 2013 they have been bombing, and like especially post June 2015 it has really accelerated. I mean, only in Ankara 177 people died in 3 different bombings. So what, or rather 4, 2 were suicidal, in which more than 100 people died. Now my point is that people of Turkey are fed up at the moment. Turkey was on a move. Look at, I mean, look at those economic indicators. Turkey was just doing fantastically well, and suddenly the bombings in Ankara or in Istanbul, for instance, or on the bordering areas. Now that is shattered. There is no tourism in Turkey, and people do understand, and they are very afraid of it. Look at the relationship between the Turkish and the Russians. Despite the economic sanctions imposed by the Russians on the Turkish, but still there are a lot of problems. And they have to survive. You can't pick up Turkey and place it close to Scandinavia. It's a reality, it is going to stay there.
That's true.
Don't you think that they also need to show some flexibility? Mr. Erdogan needs to revisit his policy.
Flexibility against what?
Against this entire...
No, they actually, the Turkish they have not done anything that they should be asked for the flexibility. What they have done, they have supported the people of Syria. And they have accepted the refugees of Syrians. What else they have done?
all right.
They have protected their country. They haven't allowed the Russian army to send their aircraft and cross their borders, and they have the right for this. What else they have done?
I mean, they have shot down one plane, but
This is the right. Do you think if a Pakistani airplane goes on any other country, would it can survive?
we are very responsible
No,
nations.
if they will move, would you think they will survive?
We stay within our own
So
border
it's the
limits.
same, I mean,
But
they
Dr.
have the
last
right.
quick comment from you on this.
Which aspect of it?
Sir, the neutral one.
Turkey's neutral, or the migrants,
Let's start from the migrants part, and then we'll move on to the role of Turkey.
which is fundamentally intertwined, really, if you think about it.
Aren't they interconnected in a way?
Absolutely.
Yeah, there you go.
So we've got that argument out of the way. It looks very dire as far as heavy media focus on migrants and everyone, most of the countries in Europe. But I'm from a migrant family. My father went to England in the 50s, settled, and I'm a product of that. And I've done quite well, if you think about it. I adapted, I integrated. This is where the problem lies, I think, more than anything else. Because a lot of those people, economic migrants, call them what you want, couldn't settle, and I feel that they're under a siege. And they still have the mentality that they had 50 years ago and haven't moved on from there. And that's a lot to do with the need for families that come from different areas of the world to a new area to learn to adapt to the local environment. I think that's essentially what needs to occur. And what you're finding is the resistance to that in the European countries from local populations is that they don't think or they don't feel from previous history that these migrant populations will adapt. And
They'll become a part of them, yeah?
they won't. They feel that they won't. And that's where the hesitance is. And that's where the resistance is from the local populations in those European countries. And they fear that. And by all means, they have every right to fear that because they've had a history of migration into those regions, economic especially. At the end
Especially
of the
what
day,
happened in Paris, I mean, lately, and that has also changed the entire dynamics of
So
that in
when you
Europe.
look at that, there's a certain hesitance from European countries to accept more. And I think we've got to look at the other side.
that's a
they've got every
legitimate
right to
concern,
do that. They've got to preserve the jobs and etc. else for their own population,
All right.
encourage their own
All right.
population as well. So
All right.
we've got to look at the other side. We can't just blame the European countries for it, except they are accepting millions now.
But to cut the long story short, I mean, you're pretty optimistic. Things will settle down. I mean, whatever has been
It
done
takes a long
has
term
been done.
and it takes-
But at least this particular move by the Russians will pave way for something
Let's
positive and
hope so.
productive. Yeah.
You never know.
Anyway, Dr. Kab, it was a pleasure. Thank you very much, Dr. Saab. Thank you very much, Bakar. And that's all we have for this particular hour. And time for news now. I'll see you again tomorrow. Till then, you take good care of yourself. Khuda Hafiz.